Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everybody who's here with us today, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Elena Nizhnik, and I'm an AR training manager here at Snap. Today is our second to last session that is dedicated to supporting all of our developers that is submitting your AR experiences to our Lensathon. As a reminder, you have 7 days left until the submissions close. Submissions close on January 31st at 2 o'clock Pacific time. And this is one of the biggest ones that Snap has ever hosted. There are $200,000 in real money prizes, and you can win them across 30 categories. So please go ahead and check out the DevPost site. If you haven't already signed up, you still have 7 days. It is never too late to start. And today's session is going to be dedicated to building custom location experiences. We have a super special guest here with us today. Eric is actually one of Snap AR engineers who has worked on plethora of features for custom location AR. So without further ado, let's welcome Eric. Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us what we're going to cover today.
Sure. Well, thanks for the introduction. So I've been at Snap for about a year and a half, depending on location AR and custom locations has been my everything. I developed the Creator Lens, which is used for scanning and helped to develop the API we'll be talking about in Lens Studio. Yes, as she said, the Lensathon, it will be ending toward the end of this month, and this one we're going to be covering custom locations. So here we have some examples from our early access creators. Really psyched about these. On the left, we have some ideas of how to do like an indoor, so an art exhibit, a museum gallery. On the middle, this was out in Seattle. These are kind of like an outdoor events, popular locations. You can augment them with location lenses. And on the right is storefronts. So this happens to be a bookstore in New York City's Chinatown. And all really interesting examples that'll hopefully inspire you for the Lensathon. So what we have up on tap for this next hour is we'll be covering the Creator Lens. So I guess the official name is Custom Locations Creator Lens. You can find it in Lens Explorer on Snapchat, or on the right-hand side is the Snap code. And I'll be jumping over to the web page for it, and we'll also be posting up the links, so you'll be able to find it very easily.
If y'all are watching and you're trying to create something for the Lensathon, we will be dropping the links to Custom Location Creator Lens and the course that Eric has mentioned. We actually collaborated on that course together with the support of another super talented AR engineer from Snap too. So if you haven't already seen it, you should definitely go and check it out. There's so much information, but I think Eric will be able to kind of condense it for you guys today in just 1 hour. So Eric,
that's
back
right.
to you.
That is the reference project I'll be going through, and hopefully it'll give you a really good starting point and some interesting ideas for you to develop on your own. And be just covering best practices in both the Creator Lens workflows and in Lens Studio. I'll be stopping frequently. It's very interactive, so definitely shoot your questions up and we will answer them as quickly as we can. And some things to know about custom locations. Obviously, it works on mobile with Snapchat, but also with our camera kit for web platform and for spectacles. So currently, the Creator Lens only works with LiDAR devices, so that's the iPhone Pro. But we are actually in development for workflows that you can use the Creator Lens without it. So we basically need it for like a very clean location mesh, which I'll show you later. But stay tuned because we'll be opening up the Creator Lens for a wider array of devices. When you're scanning a location, think about a good time to do it, like when Snapchatters would actually be on location. Usually like middle of the day and like neutral lighting is best. And we also have incremental scanning feature in the Creator Lens, which means you can create multiple scans at different times of the day. So early morning, midday, evening, nighttime, and they get compressed together into one scan that hopefully has a much wider range of lighting conditions that it works with. And usually location AR is usually running on the back camera, meaning the camera that's facing out into the world, not like selfie cam. So you should be aware that Snapchatters usually will jump in on front cam, and you need to, if for your lenses, you may want to remind them that it's best to switch to the back cam for your experience. This is what our location-based experience looks like. It's just this fun kind of imaginary garden that pops up. And you can see this UI here is kind of telling you to find and localize here. When we localize and we're tracking, the actual experience will pop up and we can interact with those hearts. So if we look and center them up on the screen, they'll play a particle system. So we're just going to learn the basics of how to use like a location scan, how to localize on it, how to display your AR experience, once the user has localized, and just some basic interactions to have fun with. So just a quick recap of the workflow. It's just important to understand that we're going to be starting in one lens, the scanning lens called the crater lens. You're going to use it to scan a location, which we'll cover in a moment, and it'll create an ID for you, which you then go into Lens Studio. We're going to create the location asset, assign it the ID, assign it to a camera tracker. We'll also have access to the location mesh, which will let you see the physical environment in Lens Studio to place your AR objects around. And some good work habits to get into for location AR is think about creating an actual custom location right in your office. So to me, I just turn around on my right-hand side and I just scan a location behind me so that when I, from Lens Studio, do send to device, and I'm using the ID in my office, I could just turn and localize and test after testing in Lens Studio. And so you get that really quick iteration in your development workflow. And then you really want to go back on location so that you don't kind of waste all this time going back and forth while you're developing. Also for public lenses, I'll just make a quick note that you do have to just take an image marker, take an image that our moderators can localize on and test your lens when you submit the lens. So don't forget that step. Cool. So before we jump into Lens Studio, I am going to cover the basics of using the crater lens. And so since I just kind of recapped everything quickly, if there's any questions, you can send them out. But in the meantime, this link will be provided. This is the snap code for the crater lens. This is a video walkthrough. So we're kind of narrating 15 minutes of the best practices. I'm just going to fly through here in a few minutes, but this is what the crater lens looks like when you first start it up. You can create a new custom location. You can load up a list of your previous ones, which are really useful to get the IDs when you're in Lens Studio, or if you wish to do that incremental scanning flow, which is down here in our documentation, and there's some settings. This is what the settings page looks like. These are the default settings. It's okay to just leave them alone. We have tuned these to the most broadest range of use cases, but we found some really interesting edge cases where we found that either lens creators really need to push the number of scans that would call them perspectives or the actual location mesh size. Real quickly, just those scans kick off right to start with. But if you're a little bit more advanced, you can always email us and we can talk about how to do some more complicated scanning setups, like separating the two scans. So what are these two scans? Well, first you have to create your mesh. You have to create your location mesh. So think of it like you're scanning the object. When you first go on location, assess the location, look around, try to figure out what might your AR experience is. Is it like guides or navigation, explainers, maybe a more serious or educational note? Is it more for entertainment or for communication purposes? But whatever the intent is, try to have an idea before you start the scan. So the first step is the actual mesh. So this is what's being created by the LiDAR sensor. And as you notice, it's kind of sitting right on top of the physical surfaces. Here, I'm super focused up on this lion statue at the New York Public Library. And I'm thinking about how my AR objects are going to spawn around, maybe behind or nearby. And so it's very important for me to scan this lion's body and understand what this body looks like in Lens Studio so that I know how to put my AR content around it. There is a testing mode, so that in this case, we just have some flowers keep spawning, and if you drag your finger, they'll spawn along the mesh, or else they randomly spawn. But they should give you an idea if your content's going to be close to this mesh, what's it looking like. When you're done with that process, we're going to scan the perspectives. And this is an interesting shift. So this is, in your mind, has to be a separate scan. you're going to step back. You're going to think about the perspectives of your Snapchatters, your lens users, and where would they be standing? Where would they be looking? So this is for your lens to localize, to know where the Snapchatter is looking. So you want to gather the perspectives of your Snapchatters. So these little dots kind of show you the surface, like what you're looking at onto. That's why they're covered on the lion statue. I'm looking at the lion statue. And these little thumbs up icons are kind of where I was standing, and they're oriented. So when you get close to them, they'll maximize and they'll show you kind of the cone of direction of the perspective. So think about this is the viewing angle, the standing location in the viewing perspective. And the whole goal is you want to maximize the chance of a Snapchatter, being notified that there's a location lens nearby, or somehow being aware of it through a snap code or an advertisement, and opening your lens, and you want to maximize that chance that they'll actually be able to be looking in the direction that you scanned their perspective at, so that we can then localize our trackers and activate your AR experience. That's the major points of it. There's some additional testing to help you out if you think that you've done it correctly. And if you ever feel like, you're going to do it several times, I recommend testing at home, just getting a feel for it, doing different rooms and seeing if you can localize, and then going on location and testing as much on location so you don't have to go back and do it again. So don't be afraid to create several custom locations. And hopefully when you get back and you build the lens, you can test on the different IDs when you're back on location, see which works best for you. In either case, you will get an ID, and this is what you will use in Lens Studio. So the whole naming of it and everything is just so that you can view your previous locations in the Creator Lens later and understand what is you're looking at. So here's what your custom locations menu will look like. You'll grab your ID. So that's the core of it. I'm not going to cover any of the special features. You can look them up here in documentation. I'll pause for some questions because that's like the first workflow. And it's very important to understand you're using a separate lens and you're creating scans, custom locations, that you're creating an ID that you then have to go back to your workstation and use at Lens Studio.
Thank you for breaking it down for us, Eric. So far, there are no questions, and we actually linked our viewers to the document that you're referring to. So if they want to get more information, and like you said, there is a lot more depth that they can get into, the links are available. So we can probably get into the next step.
Cool. So this is the reference project from our educational course. Links will be provided. And right now I want to talk about that you did all this work, you went on location, you got your ID. Here we are in a full project. So some things to notice as far as, content and 3D models and sound effects and scripts and visual effects or anything else you're adding. We have this idea of a location asset. And we have this idea of a location mesh. Now, this project, I should note that this project is exactly the way that you're going to get it. I just added this one location asset down here. So that's why it's sitting down there. But if I open up the location folder, you will have this location asset and this location mesh. Both of them came from that scanning process. So the first step is you can create a location asset. You're going to do a custom location, and you're going to enter in the ID from your creator lens, which I've already entered here. And once you do that, you'll get a resource. You'll get a file on your system that's this location asset. And when you click on it in the inspector, it looks like this, and here's the ID. If you entered the ID incorrect, you'll get like an error pop-up or something. Or later on, if you wish to, you could also type in and change this, or just delete it and create another one. Now, the next step, if we're going to bring in all our resources, is you're going to need a location mesh. And notice when I create that, here in the inspector, it says, well, what's the location you want to connect it to? And it has our location asset ID. So this is where you would just say, this is my location. And here's it as in the preview. And you can see it kind of download and generate the mesh for you. So in our project, before I hit all the major parts of it, I just want to note, as far as location goes, we have a camera, which you could just bring in here, just like that. And you're going to add device tracking to it, set it to world, and then you're going to add a device location tracking component. So these are components. They're both available here, device tracking, device location tracking. You're going to add both. Set this one to world. This will enable ARKit or ARCore for iPhone, Android. And you're going to create this device location tracking. And then that's where you're going to connect up. That's where you're going to connect up your location asset. So if I just add another one, which we are enabling multiple locations in one lenses, but that's for another time to talk about. But you create your device location track component and you drag on your asset, and then your camera will attempt to localize on that location. So we're all good to go here as far as setting it for location AR. We have a camera component comes along for the ride. We add our device tracking component, set it to world. We add our device location tracking, and we connect up our location asset. When you want to use your location mesh, either for understanding your layout of your space. So for example, here's a wall. Now I was standing and scanning, and that's why I like the floor, like down here is where the floor is sitting. So it's beneath us because kind of our zero plane is at chest height. So floor is down here. But my location mesh is showing it's just a scene object with a render mesh visual, and we just connected our location mesh to it. That's it. This is just an additional script we'll cover later. But a render mesh visual just looks like that. And that's the location stuff that we brought in. And then the whole goal at this point is, do I understand my physical space in Lens Studio? Can I start to build my AR experience? Can I do as much testing of my experience as I can do in Lens Studio? And then can I send to device? Can I test it, push the device and test it right in my office space with my office ID? And then the next step is going on location. So if there's any questions about the location workflow of getting it going into Lens Studio, we can cover that. Otherwise, I'm going to cover kind of the basic structure of the project.
Yeah, Eric, I think we can move on to the basic structure of the project. Thank you.
Great. Tween Manager is a helper script. So it's down here underneath scripts. I am going to be using Visual Studio Code to go through the scripts. It's going to look like this. There's some core scripts I'm going to cover. I'm not going to cover how the helper scripts works. You can just bring them in through import. But Tween Manager is going to help you with animation, and we're going to use quite a few of the behavior scripts to really help us with events and how to respond to events. And as you can see, the behavior script is here. It's available too. So just know that Tween Manager's up, the scene object up here is just needed to help you with animations. We have our camera, which is going to try to localize on a location. Underneath that, we have our image tracker, which again, this is for your lens submission so that a moderator can localize on the image and actually play whatever your experience is. This is just some basic lighting. This is my UI camera. And if I just turn off, it's fine. Yep, here we go. So this is my UI camera. It's just a basic frame layout. And we have some different UIs that we want to turn on and off. So this is what the loading message looks like. There's text right here that you can change up. And here's the image if you want to change it. When loading has failed, when it's trying to guide you to the location, when we're trying to get you to track, when someone is not able to track, it may take a little bit longer and they're not doing anything, or they're not able to localize, you might give them some additional help. And once everything is said and done and we're localized, here's the little instructions that are going to pop up when that fun kind of garden pops up. So that was all the UI. And so here's just a bunch of our scripts. So this is the hint controller. This is going to manage which of those UI elements get turned on and off based on if we're tracking, if we're not tracking, if we fail to download our initial location data, or if the user's already interacting with the location. This is a little behavior script that's going to know if it should turn on some hints. I'll cover that in a bit. Here's kind of a larger set of behavior scripts that are turning on and off. Basically, it's knowing when to turn on this big 3D scene or not. And then underneath here, this is the location mesh, just a visual, just so as to see it in Lens Studio. Here's kind of a floor occluder, just to put underneath the objects. And usually what you might want to do is first, this mesh just has a basic material on it, just for kind of knowing where it is in Lens Studio and in respect to the camera, in respect to Workspace 0. But sometimes you might want to, afterwards, you might want to throw an occluder material on it and use it to hide or occlude your objects, make it feel like your AR objects are actually behind physical objects or what have you. So just know you can use your location mesh as an occluder at runtime if you need to. Then here's all our AR content. All these hearts and this love icon and these plants over here. And just notice that they're like below grid plane because actual floor space is down here because chest height was up here. Now, the first step is, okay, I just showed you kind of all the major parts of our sample project. How can you start to tweak it in Lens Studio? How do you kind of like fake that we found the location? Because if you notice here in our preview, it's saying that the user hasn't found anything yet. This is our UI that's showing that, hey, maybe you want to move a little closer and try and localize. So just for you as a developer, if you just turn off this behavior script, and if you just reload, this stuff doesn't get turned off. So basically that's like the quick way. And so if this UI is bothering you, you just turn that off. And then this is what our actual experience looks like after localization. So if I walk up to say this heart, see that when I'm within range and I'm looking directly at it, it's going to activate its animation, its particle effects, and it's going to wait, and then you can activate it again. And so these 4 hearts are actually our interaction points. And everything is working. I can walk up to it. You know, you can enable clicks and anything that you're trying to recreate on the phone, you can do here. And then the next step is to push to your Office ID to test it right in your workspace. All right, so I'm going to turn behavior back on. I'm going to turn my UI back on. And let me just kind of go over. So it's like, yeah, we're at good time here. I kind of wanted to show you the structure. And now I'm going to kind of take a deeper dive into the scripts if there's any questions.
We're good to go, Eric. Thank you.
Great. Just had a quick sip of coffee. Right. So the UI, as you can see, it doesn't have any scripts on it, so I'm just going to close that up. So I guess our first major area here is this hint controller. And as you can see, it's referencing each of those UI elements. And it's also referencing our tracker for some reason. So let's see, hint controller, you can see here in the project is located here. And I'm just going to jump over into a nice zoomed in view So here you can see all of our input variables that we were looking at in the inspector. And right off the bat, it's disabling the hints, and it's doing this like initialization on the alpha. And if you come down, everything's nicely labeled. It's basically turning all these alpha off on all these UI parts and stating that it's avoiding some flickering that can happen at the beginning. So what's important to note is that we can register for some events. So camera front event, we're saying this script is going to register whenever the camera turns to the front, and we're going to bind a function to it. And this is our function right here. Basically, we're creating a little hints component. It's just like this little text pop-up, and it's just saying, hey, please be aware of your surroundings if somebody happens to be using like the front camera, the selfie camera. So as we continue on during on awake, what other code are we executing in this script? Well, we haven't loaded up yet, so that's false. But it goes out to that device location tracking component, and there's some events we can listen to. So on location data downloaded, on location data download failed. So before we can even attempt to start localizing, we have to know, did we download our tracking data, our computer vision data, along with that location mesh. So right when the lens starts, since we have this tracking component in our scene, it's going to actually do this automatically, and we want to listen to it. It's going to take some variable amount of time. It's going to go out to the cloud and try to download the stuff. So this is basically this wrap function here is just pass it. Oh no, it's down here. Sorry. So this is just a little function. You can pass in two functions, and basically what it's saying is, if the first one isn't good, just run the second one, and if both are good, we just run both. So what that means is, okay, so whatever my device location tracking, whatever this on location data downloaded does, just run it, because there might be other methods that are listening to it that need to be run as well. And then we want to run our onloading successful. And a similar setup for when download fails, we're going to run onloading fail. So what do those look like? Real quick, we see that we're just setting some UI elements. So this becomes true. We want to show that to the user. This becomes false. We don't want to show that to the user right away. But when loading is successful, we actually have our content. We're going to make this false. We don't need to show that anymore. And we want to say that loaded has true, that we're kind of ready to start to localize. And if, everything fails out, we basically want to pop up something that says, sorry, something happened with the Wi-Fi, just try loading up the lens again or something. Now here we're actually subscribing to the update event. So update events, super useful. It's going to be run as many times as it can per second, and it's usually checking for user input. Our stuff is downloaded. In this case, we're saying, hey, we do want to register to update event, and we're going to bind this method, and that's this method right here. So that means every update loop, as quickly as we can, we're going to run this code. And this is saying if we haven't loaded yet, or we actually are already tracking, we're already kind of at the end of the road, we just return. We don't have to do anything. Otherwise, we're going to do some stuff. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go grab our device location tracking component, and we're going to check that location proxy status. So there, we have documentation that you could check to. There's a bunch of properties and methods on this device location tracking component, and one of them is this location proxy status. And it's what's known as enumeration, or a nice cleaned up fancy set of strings that you can read. And this is saying that if this enum property is ever set to out of range, then we know that we're out of range, and so we want to show this part of the UI, and we're going to hide our tracking instructions. And then else, if the proxy status is saying we are within range, we are close enough to our location where we could potentially start to track, Then we want to set that to false, and we want to show our tracking instructions. So we have hide tracking and show tracking. So basically, it's just taking some of these UI elements and it's waiting. So get delta time is it's like a fraction of a second for every update loop. So it usually returns like 0.1 or 0.2 or 0.3, like just however small amount of a second that it took between the last update frame in this update loop. And then we know how much time has passed. And if enough time has passed, in this case, it's saying 5 seconds, then we're going to turn this off and we're going to turn on some troubleshooting. So remember I showed those that part where it was like, hey, if the user's like able to track, but he's kind of not like aiming his phone correctly and whatever, we're not able to localize, maybe let's show them some additional help, some additional UI help. And that's what this is doing. It's waiting 5 seconds and being like, hey, let's help you out a little bit more. And then hiding is just turning the stuff off and resetting our time spent. But this is a really good, knowing how to keep track of time and knowing when to execute something is really good. You use it a lot. And then there's just some wrap up stuff, how to disable all the hints. I'll mention this real quick because we're going to call this later on. But whenever you have, these functions are declared within this script and are usable within this script. But if you ever want to like reference this script component and call it from another script component, you have to say script.api.name, or I think we're getting with the API, I think it's just going to be like script. So in any case, I can have other script components in my Lens Studio project know about the sync controller and call this. And so it's exposed publicly outside the script. So whenever I call this, saying on location found, right, we're going to disable our hints and we're going to turn on our AR interaction, which means like show me the flowers, whatever this thing is down here. This will come on, find the hearts. Kind of like show me the flowers. And so that's a big one. And so that's controlling all of our UI, all of our hints. And so, and it touches base on like a lot. We're going to have to like communicate with our tracking component, and it's kind of bulky, but it's a lot. You're kind of managing all the different states that our UI can be in. I'm just going to take 10 seconds because that is a big script, and I'm just going to take a sip and can let me know if it's any questions.
So far, there are no questions, Eric, but I also just wanted to do a shameless plug since we all worked on that course together. A lot of what Eric is showing y'all today is actually available in the course. We took care to provide a number of scripts. So, if JavaScript is not your favorite, if you're not, too keen to be writing custom code, we actually are providing a lot of the code snippets and try to do, a good job explaining what it does. So simultaneously, if you just want to reuse it, you can also figure out exactly what it's doing, and a bunch of those things, available right there for you. So, feel free to check out the course and, explore all of those scripts.
That's right. We do try to hide a lot of what's happening behind the scenes, and we try to make very usable code for what you need for location AR without having to look behind the scenes as much. So I'm just kind of doing a quick whirlwind tour of what's happening so that hopefully you have some good tools in your arsenal for the Lensathon. But yes, this course does definitely sit here and redo it and explains little snippets of the code. You can reuse it as was suggested. So the next scene object I'm look at is behavior hints. So pretty straightforward. It just has this behavior. So remember I said these helper scripts are called behavior. So they're very like GUI driven. Like we don't even need to look in the code there. It's got this like whole interface. You can mess around with it. But the core of a behavior script is usually something triggers it. Somebody clicks on a button, or in this case, an event was fired from our tracker. And what is the response? So this is a nice, very kind of user-friendly way to do. You can do a lot of code with these behavior scripts. So this is saying that the trigger is a landmarker event. The event type is location found, and the location tracker is coming from our camera here, device location tracking. And then what happens when on location found event from our tracker gets fired off, when the Snapchatter is actually successfully able to look at your custom location and we were able to localize our tracker, what should happen? Well, this is saying we're going to call an object API. So remember I said that script.api blah, blah, blah. So that's what that script API is. It's exposed outward. We can call somebody's script API. Who are we going to call? Well, we're going to call the hint controller, this thing up here, this scene object, this script. And we're going to call a function called onLocationFound. And that's what I was just hanging out on. So script.api.onLocationFound. It's exposed externally. We called it with that behavioral script. We're going to disable our scripts and we're going to turn on all our UI hints. And we're going to turn on just that interaction hint. Find the flowers. So that's all this thing is doing. All right. Try to make use of behavior as much as you can. In fact, this next one, called Behavior AR, has got 3 behaviors sitting on top of it in a stacked queue. So the first one, when LayMarker event, okay, which one? When location found is called on our tracker, what should we do? Well, in this response, we're going to set enabled. Okay, what are we going to turn on? What are we going to set enabled? It's going to be a scene object. Which scene object? It's going to be AR content. It's going to be this here. That's why all this stuff is invisible in our preview, because it's turned off. So even though our default settings say it's on, we come over here and we're saying, if I move down a little bit on the second one here, it says trigger on awake. We're going to disable. We're going to call set enabled on this scene object and disable it. That's why it's turned off right away. And then on awake, we're going to take this mesh thing and we're going to disable it. That's why you can see the mesh here. So if I enabled it, probably pop up here. Maybe not. Probably something else is. Put that back to disable. We'll get that later. But this is disabling our AR content. This is disabling that mesh. And then this one is just saying, hey, let's listen to location found on our device location track. But when it happens, we actually enable our AR content, all of this fun, colorful stuff. And now I'm down to location mesh. Like all of our stuff is kind of, this is it. This is like the whole location AR experience just thrown underneath the scene object. And the reason we do that is, hey, just like you saw with the behavior, just turn it off by default on awake. And when we localize, when location's found, let's turn it on. Very simple. So this mirror on camera, on front camera, I'm not really going to cover it that much. And there's a bunch of notes that say, okay, when we flip to the front camera, we have this weird, like, our graphics is like flipped around. So we just kind of flip stuff and readjust the materials. And that's great. It's not really core to what we're doing. So I'm going to skip that. This is our location mesh. Oh, see, there's another behavior right here. So if I come over here, no, this is turned off. This should actually go away. All right. So if I go here and just enable it, okay. And this is what our location looks like, but we don't want to see that on lens, so we disable. Perfect. This is the floor occluder. It just sits there. That's great. So AR content. So I've got, oh, looking like we have good on time. I didn't know if I should rush. So this is going to be very interesting to cover. Now, it's not particular to location AR, but interactions and that type of like feedback loop that you design for your Snapchatter, like what can they interact with and what type of visuals are presented back to them, or how do you wish to progress your AR experience is really important. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time on this. Like, I basically covered everything that's specific to location AR. Now this stuff is just very generalized AR. So here's a whole bunch of content. And the ones I'm interested in are those 4 hearts. All right, so if I turn it on and off, this happens to be the bottom one down there. But let's see if I grab this one. Yeah, he's over there. Let's do this guy. So we have a transform. He's just positioned, scaled in the world. He does have an animation on it. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn that off and turn the UI off. I'm going to reset the lens. And now I'm like active testing mode, right? I'm trying to simulate our location as much as we can. A quick note. We are working on how to capture video that has tracking data as part of the creator lens. We're looking into workflows that enable you to capture video that has tracking data with it, so that actually in the preview here, we could actually go over and you could actually import your video on location. So it'd be a lot more impactful, the work that you could in the future get done for location AR. But for right now, I'm showing you the kind of current state. Just know that there are improvements on the way. So there we go. My inspector is slowed down.
Eric, we actually have a question from Haval, and the question is,
Sure.
when creating a lens for landmark and minor changes were made to the shape of the place later, will the lens still work correctly? And I think that, there are a few things that you've mentioned in terms of tips and tricks that will help with that, but let us hear it from you directly.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't really mention that there are some things that work really well with computer vision in general and some things that don't. So solid objects, like glass stuff and transparent stuff is not going to work well, especially if it's highly reflective, because those reflections are going to change quickly. Like you could see like people on the street moving and stuff like that. That mirror, that glass is just not going to localize well. Things that get like really shiny when they get wet might not localize well when it is wet, or that change appearance. Like certain like stones and stuff will go from like a light gray to like black, when they're wet. And it's going to, anything that changes its appearance visually drastically is going to be a poor target. So, like parts of what you're gathering, can have some poor surfaces like glass or what have you. As long as there's a lot of stuff around it that is more of a traditional material, then you'll have very good results. Things that change visual features, like you can see edges really well, and changes in materials tend to get captured well. So if you capture a location, let's just say you captured the front of like a coffee shop, and like all the chairs and tables get moved around and somebody tries to localize, as long as like a majority of the imagery, a majority of the location looks kind of the same. So like the storefront, the bricks, the big kind of banners, or anything that is part of the storefront or the walkway in front of it that like will mostly not change, will give you a great chance of localizing. If you've captured like a storefront and it's like the big wall is kind of a lot of your visual space and somebody painted it, or let's just say it was like had a lot of like graffiti or like graphic design, a lot of like different shapes with different colors, and all of a sudden the whole wall was painted one basic color, then you're going to have some issues. But I think in general, if you are aware of what you're capturing and you're like moving the phone around and you're trying to capture a lot of, and you're making sure that you're just capturing a lot of what you think would be the most stationary stuff, that wouldn't change that much, then you're good. Now, good meaning like your visual, what you're seeing visually is always like 75% the same, I think you're going to have a very good chance of localizing. And I'll just quickly...
Eric, you mentioned earlier too, right? The advice of going on location several times, right? So maybe if it is really a coffee shop, you go on location when it's closed, so there are no tables outside, right? And you capture a bit of a floor without the tables and chairs. Then you come back when they're open to see it be localized with tables and chairs. But the other thing too that you talked about that's super easy, right? Even if people that are watching us right now, if our viewers grab this example project, it's really easy to swap the location. So if there were major changes, you can go and rescan it, right? And just swap the location ID in your lens. You can make those tweaks and changes relatively quickly. I think that we try to make it as easy as possible for you to, to solve for that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's as simple as, if you see here, this is actually secretly my office location because I was testing before this. But this is my real location one. Say I've done all my testing on office, I'm good to go. I just swap that out, and this lens will work in a new location. Now, this will also work if this was working on location well and just a big thing happens and you need to rescan location, you have a new ID, the same thing works. You just have to switch out your mesh as well. So I don't know if I set this mesh up, but yeah, see there, you see there's a different mesh comes in.
Thank you, Eric.
Yep.
I think that hopefully that answers your question, Haval. If not, please let us know and we'll try to dig in a little deeper. Thank you, Eric.
Sure. And yes, incremental scanning is huge. So you could always go back on location and create a new ID, or you could try to be a little bit more preventative. And as she was suggesting, you could go to when the business is closed and scan it when they're open during like a really busy part and not so busy, and do incremental scanning, but max out at 3 scans. You'll notice some places look drastically different in the nighttime when artificial lighting is on. So that's a good time to do an additional incremental scan. Yeah, but Elaine is correct. Let's see, we got about 10 minutes. So let me cover interaction trigger. So this is a heart. So all this other stuff is graphics and it's got an animation on it. So you see it's like, it's using some type of tween system. Not going to get into that. The flowers, similar. Animation mixer, there's some tween set. That's great. But I'm really interested on interaction trigger. Okay, so what's the camera that we should be looking from to know what the user is looking at? And that's going to be our main camera, not the UI camera. Then we have some thresholds, like 10 degree, where should we, how like centered up should the heart be in the center of our screen to allow for an interaction, right? And so 10 degrees kind of around this center point is appropriate, and a distance threshold 300 centimeters. So a third of a meter, that's about a foot. So notice as I get far away, no interaction, even though it's the center, and I get close and it's interaction. And then there's this trigger name. They all have to be unique and a cooldown time. So that's why this thing only sparkles every 2 seconds. So these are all the exposed variables here. And if we look at interaction trigger, we have our update event, and it's just calling this check for trigger. But when we first awake, we do get the camera transform and our object transform, in this case, the heart, getting the scene object. Trigger defaults to false, and the rest of this is... Okay, so check for triggered. If we're already triggered, meaning we just kind of played our effect, we just don't do anything in return. Otherwise, we get the world position of our object, we get the world position of our camera, we get the vector. I'm not going to really go into the details here, but it's like a line pointing from where the camera is to where the AR object is. So we take a vector 3 and subtract another vector 3, and we get yet again another vector 3 that kind of points from the camera to the AR object. And then we use so this, we take the rotation of the camera and we throw in that vector, and this we get kind of like an angle of where the camera is pointing. So if this, where the camera is pointing is far, like if it's pointing right at the object, it'll be like 0 degrees or 0 radians. And the farther away, that number gets larger. And if that is less than our threshold, which was 10, and 10 degrees, which we have to convert to radians because we're working radians here, and we store it there, and you see that we end up using it here, but we do a distance check as well. Basically, we want to ignore the height difference, so we just set the Y position. And then what we do is take a vector, take the distance to the other vector, so we get a number, like an actual distance, a float number. So it could be like a meter, 1.5 meters away. So if that distance is, or it's in centimeters, I should say, but if that's less than 300 centimeters, then if we're within our 10 degree threshold and we're within our 300 centimeter threshold and we have not triggered, we will trigger, and then we call this. And what is this doing? It's saying, basically saying, do we have a trigger name? So do we have a name here that we can call out? So it's kind of like a little event system. It's pretty neat. So we're calling the behavioral system and saying, hey, send out this trigger by this name, which is trigger heart 5. And then here it's just saying, cool it down. Basically, keep track of the time and just wait. So here a delayed callback. And after the delayed callback is done, we can set trigger to false. So we're going to call this little function right here after we delay, and our cooldown time is 2 seconds. All right, so this thing is just broadcasting out into the behavioral system that we have, saying, hello, this event happened called trigger heart 5. So who cares about that? So if I dig underneath heart 5, we have some animation set up. So here's like the heart mesh and it's animated or whatever. But what's interesting here is this is like that sparkle. So this is that like little sparkling you're seeing happening every 2 seconds, the VFX. And here's the render mesh for it. And here's like the material that's doing it if you want to look into it. But what I'm interested in here in the last few minutes is particle handler. We're going to like wrap up right on time. So particle handler. Okay. We have some time to run our little particle system. We're going to go out and get that render mesh. Basically, they're like resetting it. They're resetting the materials, resetting the particles. If you just go down and look there, it's just like resetting times and turning it off. But it's saying if we have a behavioral system, okay, well then add a custom trigger response. Just check our API documentation. It talks about this, but you can just reuse all this stuff. Pass in that name, and when that event happens, let's run this function. So if I come back out here, you see that they wrote trigger heart 5, same name as the interaction trigger. So on the one side, an interaction happens, it sends that string out. So who cares? Who wants to know about it? Well, I do, because I registered to it, and on trigger happens. So what happens is we register our start time. Get time is whatever how long the lens has been running for, how many seconds. And then we're going to turn it on. And then we just have this like update loop always running. This is the function that's run every update loop. And it's saying if particle start time is greater than 0, well, it defaults to 0. And the only time it gets a number other than 0 is when on trigger happens. And what happens then? They're doing some settings to the particle system, setting its lifetime and its spawn duration, and figuring out how long the particles should live. And otherwise, we reset the particles back to default. So that was the whole experience in a nutshell. Hopefully, that was interesting and inspiring and insightful.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you for breaking it down for us. Thanks for sharing all the useful links to documentation, to the course. And of course, thanks for contributing to the course. You were a huge part of making sure that this actually happened. In terms of everybody who's been on the stream today, we do not have any additional questions other than the one that we've already covered. So maybe we can just give our viewers another minute or so to, collect their thoughts. If they have any last minute questions, so you can address them while we're still here live. And otherwise, if not, then we will just end up saying goodbye a few minutes earlier. And again, if you're still watching, if you have not already submitted your project to the Lensathon, and you still have 7 days left, whether or not it's a custom location-based AR experience that you will build or anything else, you still have time, so don't miss it. $200,000 in real cash prizes to be won across 30 categories, so many chances to win. Go ahead and try your hand at it. So we're just getting thank you notes from Farhad. Thank you all so much for watching and joining us. Josh is thanking us. And actually, I think Josh said that they were joining us from Nigeria. Josh, welcome all the way from Nigeria. Actually, Josh said that they have a question. So Josh, feel free to ask. We still have a few minutes. I would love to dig in and hopefully address the questions that you may have. So let us know. And speaking of where we're joining from, Eric, you are joining us from nearby New York City, right?
Mm-hmm. Suburbs of New York, correct.
Suburbs of New York, that's right. Which is why when Eric was showing the New York Library. Okay, we have another question from Yasi. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. If not, I do apologize. Can we use connected lenses with custom locations?
I'm going to say yes, but there's a lot of gotchas with that. So we did clean up a lot of privacy issues, and we're trying to get both to work really well. We actually, as far as connected lenses, we have a lot of the storage abilities separated out. So we have a lot of persistent storage, and we're currently working on, we get a shared location AR experience going. So basically the essence of co-located lenses, but with the twist of custom locations. So we are I'm going to say right now you cannot, but we do have persistent storage available for custom locations, and we are working on what we're calling shared custom locations or shared. So yes, soon.
Thank you, Eric. And Josh's question is whether or not there is a location-based AR template that Josh can use to work with. And I believe that not only do we have a template in Lens Studio once you open it up, actually, if you use the project that Eric was covering today, you can customize it any way you want, and it already has a lot of information covered for you. So yeah, we definitely have resources for you.
Yeah, I would recommend use the link that we give for this educational course project. This, in a few weeks, is actually going to be our template project. We have our current template project was from the first iteration of custom locations, and we've greatly improved the template project, which is essentially what I just showed you just now.
Exactly. So I'm just sharing the link again in the chat.
This link here, yeah, the reference project and educational courses.
Great. And we have one more question, and after that, we'll end our stream. Thank you all so much. And Josh's question is, such as that is simply recognizes a life building location or a monument like a bridge and triggers a 3D model. And yes, Josh, that's exactly what this template will do for you. You'll just have to scan your location, as Eric was showing in the beginning. Actually, this live stream will be converted to a video, so you can always go back to it. But absolutely, the project that Eric was going over, you can use it to actually pop in a location ID of a real location that you can scan in your area. Just, make sure to review some of the tips and tricks and recommendations of how to best capture your location mesh to be most successful.
That's correct.
Great. Well, Eric, thank you so much for your time. We're actually ending right on time today. It's been a pleasure to have you, and thank you all so much for being with us today. Best of luck in Lensathon if you're participating, and if you're just here today to learn, then thank you so much for your time and attention. We will see you. Actually, this Thursday, we have one more stream, so hopefully we'll see you there. Bye, everybody.
Bye.